So a few months ago, I was talking to a good friend of mine, somebody whose ears I actually sort of kind of trust, and he told me hey Sean, if you ever get the chance, you should check out the latest stereo receiver from Cambridge. It's pretty good for the money. To which I said, I don't know. I mean, look, I've had a lot of their gear in the past, nothing really ever excited me, and I'm just not really interested in putting my time into this. And after a lot of procrastination, I said, you know what? You never know until you try, things change. So I took this for a spin, and you know what, guys? I'm glad I did because he was right. This is a very good sounding unit for the money. So having said that, let's roll the intro and talk about it.
Here's what I like. Laying on the beach with sunlight in my eyes, laughing with my friends under the sky, following our hearts, so then we take a ride wherever. I always try to live my spirit.
Okay, so here it is, the Cambridge AXR100 stereo receiver. At 100 watts per channel, it just so happens to be the most powerful receiver in the Cambridge lineup. And with all units like this, Cambridge wants this to be a one-box solution, something that has enough power to drive most loudspeakers very well, while offering the kind of features that they feel most audiophiles want, like a built-in phono stage, a built-in DAC, the ability to stream Bluetooth to it, and the ability to connect headphones to it. Now, as with all of my evaluations, I'm going to start off by going over what you get with the unit. We're going to take a look at the front, the back, we're going to take a peek on the inside, and then I'm going to talk about how I feel it performs. But first, I need to address the following question because I'm sure a lot of people are going to ask this, which is, why would I review a stereo receiver over an integrated amplifier? I mean, aren't integrated amplifiers better and more audiophile? And the truth is that the only thing that separates a receiver from an integrated amplifier is that a receiver will have a built-in AM/FM tuner. That's it. Otherwise, I mean, they're pretty much the same thing, which is something I'll show off to you in just a couple minutes. So why don't we do this? Let's take a look at what we get with the AXR100, starting off with the front of the unit. As you can tell, it has a very clean and simple aesthetic to it, something that I like. For those of you who don't like getting up to hit all these buttons or to change the volume, it comes with this plastic remote control, nothing fancy, but it's nice to know that it has it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over the different things on the front panel, starting from left to right. So on the left, we're going to have our power button. We hit that. The unit will come on. We'll be greeted with this whitish, bluish text, which is very eligible. And again, it just doesn't draw much attention to itself. Over here, we are going to have our headphone jack. This is going to be a 1/4 jack. Don't ask me how much power this unit will put out to the headphone jack because literally almost no company advertises that. I would say you're just going to want to use fairly sensitive headphones with it in order to get good power. The entire bottom row of these buttons is actually going to be dedicated to the tuner. So we have presets, we have the different modes that you can go through, you can adjust over on this section to different channels, but most of you are just going to use a remote anyways, but you still have that option if you like getting up to change things. Up top, we are going to have our input selectors. This is going to be for our tuner. Next to that, we are going to have this clever setup to where you can adjust between analog and digital inputs with just one button. So right now it's on digital, but you hit it, it's going to move to analog. So we have 3 of them, 3 analog inputs and 3 digital inputs. Kind of cool. Over here, we're going to have our button for the phono stage, and then we're going to have our speaker A/B selector. Next to that, we're going to have our menu button. This is to adjust things like bass and treble. Then we're going to have our volume control. It's a little scratchy, but that's okay. And then we're going to have a 3.5 millimeter input. That's going to be it for the front of the unit. So now let's take a look at the back. Okay, so now it's time to quickly go over the different inputs and outputs on the back of the AXR100. On the top left-hand corner, we have connectors for our AM and FM antennas. Beneath that, we're going to have the inputs for our DAC. So this is going to be an old school 16 to 24-bit DAC, and you can connect to it via an SBDIF input or 2 optical inputs. I know it looks like a USB input next to it, but that's actually a service port, something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in this review. Beneath that, we are going to have 3 analog inputs. Next to that, we're going to have our input for the phono stage. So this is going to be moving magnet and moving coil. Next to that, we're going to have a record out for those of you who use tape decks or CD recorders. And then we're going to have a subwoofer output. That's actually kind of cool. On top, we're going to have our Bluetooth module. This is going to be Bluetooth 5.0. And then we're going to have our speaker terminals. We have A and B banks. So whenever you use 2 speakers at the same time, it's basically going to have the power output. So in this case, let's just say it's an 8 ohm load. 50 watts will go to A and then 50 watts will go to B. And then on the other end, we have an IEC inlet for our power cord, and that's going to be it. So now we're just going to pop the hood, take a look on the inside, and then I'm going to talk about how it sounds. So here's the inside of the Cambridge AXR100 stereo receiver. I think the first thing that most of us are going to notice is the huge toroidal transformer to our left. So this is what's going to give us our 100 watts into 8 ohms. Interestingly enough though, Cambridge does not rate what the output power is into 4 ohms, which is a little disappointing. Next to that, we have this large heatsink. I actually believe it's one piece, which is pretty cool. Under that, we are going to have our transistors in a push-pull configuration. Some of you are going to notice this fan. This is for thermal regulation. It's only going to come on when you're really driving this receiver hard. And if you are, odds are you're not going to hear it going to begin with because you're listening at such a loud volume. Next to that's going to be our filter caps. They're pretty small. I think they're around 10,000 microfarads a piece, but hey, it'll get the job done, right? And then next to that, we're going to have our DAC. And then we have the component that makes a receiver a receiver. This is going to be our AM/FM tuner module. Without that, this would be an integrated amp. The rest of the board looks okay. I'd say the build quality is just okay. The parts seem to be sloppily populated across everything, but hey, it all works still, right? Anyways, I think the only thing I forgot to mention is the price. The AXR100 retails for $499. So now it's time to talk about what that buys you in terms of performance. Okay, so when it comes to performance, I'm just going to go ahead and cut to the chase and give you my summary first, and then I'll dive into more detail as the video goes on. So long story short, I think the AXR100 is a fantastic unit for the money and is something that I'm going to begin recommending to a lot of people from this point onward. And it's going to be for 2 primary reasons. The first being it has good power. I mean, no, it's not a muscular beast, but at the same time, I feel like it's going to drive most average loudspeakers well in most listening rooms to fairly sane volumes, something that I think most people will enjoy. And then the second thing is going to be sound quality. So I like how this unit sounds because it's not in your face. Instead, it's just the opposite of that. This is a smooth, laid back sounding unit. It has this warm and rich sound to it, and it just makes listening to music enjoyable, which is the whole point of this thing to begin with. And let's face it, most of us, we don't listen to just audiophile approved recordings like jazz and classical or vocals or just acoustic. Don't get me wrong, I love those genres of music, but I also love rock and roll. I love metal. I love electronic. I love hip hop. And oftentimes it can sound horrible on an audiophile system, but through this, it's just forgiving enough to where I can just kick back and listen and have a good time. But because it has good power, it still has that dynamic power to it. There's still life to the sound. And I think that combination is really special for this kind of money. And I absolutely love it. So what do I not like about this unit? Well, in terms of sound quality, there's not much to pick apart. But I think the features are a little bit old school in 2020. I mean, number one, you don't even have a pre-output. So if you do want more power, you don't really have that option on this unit. I thought that's a little bit of an oversight. And then, of course, you don't have USB connectivity. I think, again, in 2020, that's what a lot of people want. And I think this is the very end of the line for a manufacturer to charge this kind of money for something and to get away with not including that feature. And in time, I would expect to see companies like Cambridge to include features like the ability of the unit to connect to a network via Wi-Fi. But again, it is going to be more of an affordable piece. You can't expect everything, but that's going to be my general thought on the unit. So if you're interested in more detail, stick around and prepare for a whole bunch of audiophile vernacular. So, are you ready for a whole bunch of audiophile jargon? Then let's go. And let's start off by first going over the general character of the AXR100. And let me make this clear. If you're somebody who likes that V-curve presentation with boosted treble and boosted bass because you find it exciting and engaging to listen to, then there's a good chance you may not like this unit because that's not what it's about. Instead, it has more of a richer, warmer presentation, something that's a little bit more laid back. Or in other words, it's going to be for somebody who says, hey, look, when I buy something like this, I want to be able to sit down and listen to my music for hours on end, not be impressed for the first 10 minutes and then afterwards rush to turn off my system because my ears are bleeding. And for people like me who listen to a wide variety of music, with most of it not exactly being recorded all too well, I think it's important to have something to where you can listen to your music whenever you're in the mood to do so without worrying about if it's going to be too bright and too edgy sounding. And again, if that's you, then there's a good chance you're going to like this unit. And now let's go into more detail, starting with the treble. Now, you would think that that smooth sound means that the treble is rolled off. And while I think it is a little polite sounding, I feel like it's still mostly neutral. In fact, the dark and black background on this unit, thanks to the low noise floor, allows for information to come out with ease. Now, is it going to be in your face like other budget components? Well, no, it's not going to be. It's not going to be the most airy and spacious and refined sounding top end in the world. But again, all the good detail is there. And most importantly, it's smooth enough to where you can listen to less than perfect recordings and not feel like your ears are going to be assaulted. And I think that's very important. Moving on, let's talk about the mid-range. So the mid-range for something at this price is very natural sounding. Dare I say, it almost competes with the Iota VX SA3 in this regard. I do think there's a little coloration there. This is when you're going to hear just a little bit of that warmth. But again, it rides this fine line between neutrality and warmth. It's not overly saturated in tonal color. It's just, it has a little bit of it. Overall, though, I think it's very pleasant to listen to. We have the bass. You would think the bass actually is just a little bit over-exaggerated, but that's not the case here. In fact, this has a really big power supply in it that you saw earlier, and that allows the unit to control the woofers very well. So actually the bass, if anything, is pretty clean sounding. One could argue that maybe there's a little bit of warmth to it, but actually it's more about speed than about heft. And then there's going to be dynamic output. And this is going to be what I think really distinguishes the AXR100 from other options like Denon. Because what I'm saying about this unit sounds kind of similar to Denon, only this I would say is smoother sounding on top than Denon, which can get a little bit gritty. And then on top of that, though, the Denon units don't exactly have great dynamic output, whereas this one actually does. I mean, its ability to transfer a lot of energy at once and then stop on a dime, I mean, this thing does a great job with that. And usually, I would say components that do not have that forward sound, usually they don't have that dynamic rhythm to it, but this actually does. Imaging is more a function of speakers than electronics, but I'll just say that it allows your speakers to lay down the sound stage that they're naturally capable of. It doesn't seem to influence it too much. Can't hate about that. And otherwise, I mean, that's just, it is what it is. It's a powerful, dynamic, yet somewhat warm, laid back, and easy to listen to amplifier. So with that being said, now let's talk about equipment matching, then I'll go over to caveats, and then I'll wrap this whole thing up. So this section is going to be short and sweet because when you have a product that's voiced like the AXR100 and you have the kind of power it offers, that means it's going to pair up well to a wide variety of speakers, especially speakers that are a little bit more lively in nature like affordable Klipsch, Kef, B&W, Paradigm, and even other speakers like Revel, Q-Acoustics, Triangle, and the list goes on, meaning that this is going to be a super easy solution for me to recommend. So I think it's going to be easier actually to focus on the kind of products that won't work well with something like the AXR100. And in my opinion, it's going to be, number one, products that are voiced similarly to it. A great example being the ELAC debut reference, the DBR62. So this is basically the speaker form of the AXR100. Very well balanced, and if anything has a sound that's slightly warm, slightly rich, and easy to listen to. And when you pair the two together, I admit that the sound can be a little bit flat, maybe even a little bit boring to listen to, but some people out there may absolutely love the combination. So as always, it's something you need to try, but that's a combo that I would probably recommend against more times than I would recommend for. And another example would be the Magnepan LRS. Now, these speakers require a lot of power, and while the AXR100 has a big old transformer, I don't feel like it's the best match for something like that. You really do need a solution with just a little bit more drive to it. But otherwise, this thing's good to go with most real-world speakers and real-world applications. So now it's time to go over some of the caveats. Okay, so this section is going to be short and sweet as well because, quite frankly, I've already covered most of the main caveats already. So first, let's get the obvious out of the way. Not everybody's going to like the sound of this unit. That's a given. That's the same thing with every hi-fi component. I think the only caveats worth repeating is the fact that here we have this unit that's meant to be this one-box solution. Yet in 2020, it's missing some key features like a USB input. The ability to connect to a Wi-Fi network would be nice. Having a variable pre-out so you can add an additional amplifier would only make sense both for the consumer and, quite frankly, for Cambridge. And then if I want to get really pedantic, the remote is pretty cheap. But outside of that, I think the performance is there, and it's clear that that's what Cambridge was focusing on with the AXR100. And that, of course, leads me to my final thoughts. So, final thoughts on the Cambridge AXR100 stereo receiver. Overall, I really like it. I think for $500, you're getting great performance for the money. And it has the kind of sound that, as I mentioned earlier, not only lends itself well to a wide variety of speakers, but I genuinely believe that it can make people happy for a very long period of time, making it very easy for me to recommend to you all. Now, is it perfect? No, absolutely not. Is it going to be for everybody? Absolutely not. The same thing can be said for literally every hi-fi component ever made, regardless of the price. I think in the future, Cambridge is going to have to step up their game and start offering features that are more reflective of today's modern age. And it would also be nice in the future if they actually rate the power output into something like 4 ohms. But beyond that, I think if you're in the market for something that has good power, that's dynamic, yet has an easygoing sound that you can listen to for hours on end, then you owe it to yourself to check it out. Anyways, guys, that is going to be my take on this stereo receiver. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace. Can you still see me over the stack of gear? Probably not, and it doesn't really matter anyways. So, one comparison that I'm sure just about everybody is going to ask me about is how the IOTA VX SA3 stacks up to the Cambridge AXR100. This is going to be a little bit of a tease because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually save this comparison for a separate video because I feel like enough people are going to be interested to where it's worth making a separate video. But let me just say, it's a very interesting matchup, so I can't wait to publish that, hopefully later on this week. Anyways, I just want to let you know that it is coming, but I want to take a little bit more time with it first. So having said that, for real this time, thanks for watching. Peace.